Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Paving the Way Forward, presented to you by Wells Fargo and NFCC. I'm so pleased and honored to be your host. I'm Asia Chandler. I'm on-air personality with Urban One, and today we're going to understand, or try to understand, the home buying journey. Because, purchasing a home is probably one of the largest investments we'll ever make. I mean, very few of us will ever go out and buy our own personal planes, right? So the National Foundation for Credit Counseling has collaborated with Wells Fargo to provide a series to the keys to home ownership. It's going to help you improve your financial literacy, also help you with home ownership opportunities, and we'll include topics on credit, ownership, estate planning, budgeting, financing, and so much more. Existing homeowners may also learn about the financial obligations of home ownership, home maintenance, and how to avoid delinquency and foreclosure. So joining us today, we have some super great guys. We'll start with Rulon Washington. He's the Executive Director of Wells Fargo. Welcome, Rulon.
Hey.
We also have Barry Coleman joining us, the Vice President of Program Management and Education with NFCC. Hi, Barry.
Hello, Asia. How are you?
I'm well. And we have Herman Palmer, the Senior Vice President of Outreach and Inclusion for the National Foundation of Credit Counseling. Hi, Herman. How are you?
Hey, Asia. How you doing? Glad to be
good.
here.
I know, right? The gang is all here. We're back together. So many people had so many questions from our previous talks. Home ownership is something that people are inquisitive about. People want to know how they can get it started, or what do they need to do. So let's just kick things off with the basics. Let's start off with, what are the keys in the home buying process? And I'll start with you, Herman.
Okay. Well, the keys would be, I would say, because I work for what you'd want to do, I work for NFCC, I'd say connect with a HUD certified nonprofit counselor.
Right.
Because they can guide you through the process and take a lot of stress and emotion out of it. Okay. After that, it's really all about budgeting, identifying your must-haves, and then finding a real estate agent to guide you. You want to get approved for a mortgage, and this tells you how much house you can afford. Right. And it also tells sellers that you're a serious buyer. After that, you want to make an offer. And you want to make sure that if it's accepted, then there's the home inspection, there's the appraisal, contract review, title search, and all these steps are meant to help the buyer to ensure that the house is safe to occupy. Right. There are no structural issues or compromising flaws tied to that particular property. Mm-hmm. And then you need to apply for and be approved for a mortgage. And after that, you just finalize your documents and you have your closing.
There you go. So you have to go see Rulon. You have to go over to Wells Fargo.
Money man.
Yeah. And getting started in that process. It's the first question you have to ask yourself is what's my living situation right now? Right? Am I renting? Am I, if I'm a younger person, am I staying with a family member? Am I getting started to enter the home ownership journey? Because it's a journey. It's a journey. And, we look from afar and we use examples from maybe family members or friends and say, wow, man, this guy has an amazing house. I want to get into that house. Right. But you're renting right now, or you just started renting, or you don't have any experience managing a home or the cost of a home. So the first question is, where am I in my home ownership journey right now? Okay. Am I ready to have that conversation? Now, if you're not ready to have that conversation, it's really, you have to take self-inventory around your finances. Like, how much money do I make? Is it tough for me to pay my rent right now? If it's tough for me to pay my rent right now, am I going to be able to manage a mortgage? And so once you start to have that conversation around what does my budget look like? And Herman, you said it perfectly, right? Working with HUD-approved housing counseling agencies to really do that deep dive into your finances, help you get your credit right, and prepare you to have that conversation, that real conversation with your bank. Because that's the next step. Once you get your finances in order, it's that conversation with the bank. A lot of folks, they'll skip to, I had that conversation with about my finances, and now I'm ready to see the house.
Right.
You got to take a step back and really pace yourself through this process, because you need to understand how much house you can actually afford, right? Many of us, we might outlive our means or overspend in our monthly budget, right? So, you have this amazing apartment that has all of these amenities, and you're paying $2,500 a month for this. But that conversation around you probably spending a lot less in a mortgage payment is a real conversation to have, right? That doesn't mean you need to go and find a mortgage payment that's $2,500 a month, right? That means you need to figure out what you can actually afford. And then that's when you have the conversation with your lender. And then the lender can turn around and actually have a real conversation around your finances before you start to explore what the house you're looking for is actually in place. Like, where is it, where I want to live, what neighborhood is it in, so on and so forth. So really, your finances are important.
So you mean I can't go get a mansion first? I want, I want
Listen,
a mansion in the pool.
if
I want 3-car garage, I want.
I want that right now too.
I can't get that for $1,700.
Oh my God!
A week.
You're like
A week.
maybe in Alaska somewhere. I know that's
right.
So that falls under your umbrella, Barry. I'm sure with you having to have so many conversations about home ownership and the education behind it. Talk to us a little bit about what you think the home buying process, is for beginners.
Yeah. So I would say first and foremost is assessing your financial readiness. Reviewing your credit score, looking at your debt to income ratio and, what you have in savings. I think that's really the foundation before any large purchase, including home ownership. But, your finances have to be in order first before you can take that step to actually purchase a home. And, just like Herman mentioned, housing counseling can really help a consumer better understand their finances, really honestly see where they are and have that honest conversation as to whether or not, you're actually in a position to move forward. And if you aren't, then they can help you create a plan to get to that point. So I can't stress enough the importance of financial readiness and, assessing the services of housing counseling to ensure that your finances are in order before you start looking to purchase a home.
Okay, so there is an order to this. There's an order to it.
Absolutely.
I agree. So Rulan, this leads me back to you because we did talk about actually we just got a question that came in. I'll come back to that. But we talked about the readiness and the financial aspect of it. So many people kind of listen to their friends and their cousins and they listen to the stories. Right. Like, oh, you have to have this pristine credit score. Or they'll say something, I've heard silliness like, okay, well, if you have a check cashing card, it'll report to your credit bureau. You hear these stories.
Right.
And you have to kind of point people in the right direction. So what advice do you have to the newcomers as far as getting your credit package together and coming and meeting and sitting down with someone like yourself?
Yeah. So Barry, and I was going to make a comment when you were speaking because you hit something on the head, an honest conversation.
Yes.
An honest conversation. You have to have those. Coming to reality around where you are is extremely important. The choice of going directly to your lender or to a bank, you're signaling to the bank that you're ready, that you're prepared, because we're going to provide the loan for you. We're going to provide the liquidity for you to purchase said item.
Right.
But there's some homework that you got to do beforehand, right? Making sure that you can manage your budget, your debt to income. And I know in a later show, we're going to talk a bit more about terminology, which will be helpful for the audience. But, your debt to income is important. Your credit score is important. Understanding what your credit report actually is extremely important. And so as a mortgage provider, as a mortgage lender, as a bank, we would prefer the consumer be ready to have that deeper conversation, right? All banks are in this position to where we want to lend money, but essentially it's really up to that consumer to find the real help that's out there in the market. That's why we partner so well with organizations like the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, because they have the ability to have a deep, involved conversation around the finances. They're going to ask that question, why are you spending money on this? Right? Have you thought about getting cheaper car insurance?
Right.
Why do you have the cable bill and all of these subscriptions, right? They're going to dive deep into your finances and hopefully get you prepared to when you come to a Wells Fargo, you know exactly what you can afford. You know what your credit score is. You've already had your credit report pulled by a housing counselor. So now you come in with ammunition, you come in prepared. So now you go from financial fear to financial empowerment, right? And you can start to have that deeper conversation. And so that's what a lender is going to be anticipating when you walk through the door as you have that conversation is, oh, this person's ready to have a talk around borrowing this money, right? What we often find is that consumers will come and they're inquiring around the process. One of the things that you don't want to do is start to engage with the bank and start to go down a mortgage application and a pre-approval, and you don't know what you can afford.
Yeah.
You don't know what your budget looks like. And then that can negatively impact your credit because that bank may pull a hard pull inquiry on your credit report, understanding that you're interested in buying a home. So just be smart and take this information and use it and leverage it in the most appropriate way.
Right.
And if I could, a lot of people don't engage because of the fear of hearing no.
Right.
And the thing that I would tell anybody, no is not your enemy.
Right.
No is the first part of not yet. You're not saying no, it's not a judgment. There's something in your financial profile that says this person might even be able to complete the transaction of buying the home, but there's something preventing them from staying in the home long term. Maybe they don't get the right interest rate, which makes their monthly payment beyond their means. Maybe it's a situation where, for whatever reason, they can't do it. So the importance of being honest with yourself and recognizing that no is not your enemy. I'd much rather wait 2 years to buy a home I can stay in, my family can stay in for 30 years than go 1 week, get in, and then before the end of the year, I'm out.
Yes.
So be honest with yourself and understand the communication. It's not a judgment, it's a statement, and it's giving you the opportunity to improve your situation, your circumstance, so that you can make some adjustments, some changes in your behavior, in your profile that sets you up for long-term success.
Absolutely. Because knowledge is power, and you knowing is half the battle. And you mentioned something that is, but a lot of people probably aren't aware of, that in most cases, your rent is probably substantially higher than your mortgage. I know for many years, I was paying a ridiculous amount of money in rent. And then when I got into my first home, it was almost cut in half. And I didn't understand how. I was like, how did I get this? You know, I had a condo, and I'm like, how did it cut down so much? And again, knowledge is power. And I think if I had known that a little bit sooner, I would have looked into home ownership a lot earlier on. So let's get into what a person should be looking at when looking for a home. What advice do you have to the newcomers? Because, you know, we have people that are just starting off grassroots. You know, they're in their apartments, or they've been in their place that they're living in now for a long time. Sometimes this is generational too. You know, we have families that have lived in the same complex like their entire I see your face or mine, but we do know sometimes it's generational. So how do we break this generational curse, and how do we start them from the ground floor?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think if you don't have a personal relationship with someone, whether it's a family member, coworker, folks at church, to really understand what they went through around home ownership, your first thought is going to be, I want that mansion, right? Or my kids need to go to a school in this school district, so I got to buy a house over here, right? And understanding where you are financially, you have to have another conversation. It's what's the realistic next step for me? Can I afford living in this area? So when you think about where you want to live, you think about the neighborhood, right? Everyone wants to live in a safe environment, right? But sometimes that comes at a higher cost, right? You think about, you know, when you get into the mortgage, you're also paying your property taxes and your homeowner's insurance. You know, is the property tax in that area, is it a bit higher than some other areas, right? You think about just the quality of the school district, right? The distance and the commute from where you work, or where you have other types of business, right? It's thinking about where you want to live. And unfortunately, the default is, I want to stay there, right? And not really understanding what's involved in the payment to stay in that place. So when someone's first getting started, you know, maybe it's, hey, let me get out into a starter home. Let me find a place that's affordable for me. Let me get the understanding of how homeownership works. Let me live in that home for 4 or 5 years, right? Now, what you end up doing is actually making that an investment for 5 years, because once you start to expand your horizons around real estate, maybe it's time for you to move into a bigger home,
Right.
right? And now you're able to sell that first dwelling or even use that as an investment property to help offset the costs for a larger mortgage. And maybe now that second or third home, it's time to move into that mansion because you're prepared, you're ready, and you understand how home ownership works. Home run, if you get into home ownership, it's not a home run, right? It's not, I'm going to knock the ball out of the park and then I'm going to live here forever.
Right.
A lot of times it's really understanding where do you start.
Right.
And sometimes it's not in the neighborhood that's your dream neighborhood when you're getting started. Sometimes it's let me get into home ownership and get the process down packed and get this investment going. So that way I understand how the actual mechanism of home ownership works.
Okay. Okay.
One thing I would say is take a home buyer education course.
Right.
Many are low cost or even free. And these
Right.
are workshops that help you understand the full process and can even connect you with down payment assistance programs.
Yes. Yes.
You also want to build your savings and down payment.
Right.
You're going to have to deal with closing costs, moving expenses. You should create a monthly budget and understand what you can realistically afford beyond the mortgage. Things like taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, and that emergency fund for those unexpected surprises.
Absolutely.
Then you also want to look at your credit report and see what it says. A lot of people get surprised by, what? I never lived there. I didn't buy that. And those things they hit your credit score. And when your credit score goes down, all of a sudden you pay more in interest and it drives your costs up. So you want to check that and make it, make sure you take all the corrections so that you can get the right credit score, pay the right terms, and have a benefit and a successful long-term investment.
Hermod made some excellent points there. I recall you're welcome, my brother. You're welcome. But I recall when I first purchased my first home, the church that I was attending at the time was sponsoring home buyer education classes. And so my wife at the time and we decided to sign up for it. And it was an eye-opening experience. I mean, we heard from realtors, we heard from lenders, we heard from credit professionals, and we got a great education, overall education in the entire home buying process. And it really helped us quite a bit. We were able to connect with the realtor through that process. We were able to connect with the lender through that process. And it really, I think, helped us to make a wise decision in purchasing that home. So I would recommend that anyone especially those that have never purchased a home before, find a home buyer education class and learn from A to Z what the home buying process is all about. You'll be better prepared. You'll know what questions to ask, and you'll be in a position to make better decisions just going through that process.
Absolutely. And Barry, I would even suggest to people who have purchased a home before to also attend these classes. And I'll tell you why I say that. When I was 22, my father actually made me buy a home. He was like, no, you're going to buy a house. And I was like, no, I wanted to go shopping. He said, no, you're going to take this money and you're going to make an investment. So he walked me through the process, but he just did it from how he had purchased homes before. So I literally didn't learn anything my first time, my first go around. But once I got the first house, it's kind of like you get that bite, you get that bug. You're like, I want another one and another one if you can. So when I purchased my second home, I actually went through those courses and I got $20,000 in closing assistance, which I don't think my father knew about because, he had purchased his home a while ago before that. So I think that if you are interested in purchasing a home, whether you own a home now or are a first-time buyer, you should definitely get that information because there's a lot of stuff out there that we just don't know. Right? What are your thoughts about that, Amon? I see you making those faces over there.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. It's the secret sauce, in my opinion. It's the secret sauce. There was a study that Freddie Mac did about 10 years ago, I believe, that said that 20% of homeowners that go through homebuyer education are 20% more likely to not default on their mortgage. So The education is there. And as from a bank's perspective, we want you to take advantage of those resources,
right?
Because you come back empowered, financially empowered. And now that conversation around how much money you want to borrow, what kind of loan that's a different conversation because you're savvy in the process. The housing counseling organizations across the country, they do an amazing job of not only getting you prepared, but they have the keys to different resources.
Right.
The down payment assistance, like you mentioned, Asia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those programs, those nonprofit organizations, those housing counseling entities, they're working directly with those program administrators to create programs. And so,
Right.
when you walk through that door and you are participating in that 8-hour course on a Saturday, it's worth your
Right.
time.
It's
Because
so
when you
worth it.
leave that course, you have a better understanding of what home ownership means to you. And then, not only do you do that, not only do you attend those, but if you follow up with some individual housing counseling, some home ownership counseling, then now you're able to dive into personally what you can afford, what programs are out there for you. And also, the organizations that are out there doing that work, they have relationships with lenders. So they have a preferred lender list, and they're aware of all of the programs that each bank might have as well, too. So they're able to give you a deep dive on what different products are out there. So they're an invaluable resource.
I agree.
So you got the old adage, knowledge is power.
Yes.
What I say is knowledge over your financial circumstance gives you superpower.
Right.
Mm.
I would agree with that. And it'll also help you with finding a realtor. I think that's a huge part in the home buying process, because finding the right realtor makes all the difference in the world. Then Barry, you're laughing.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
It's really, really important. I've gone through the process before and hired a realtor and had to fire that realtor and find a better one. And I probably would have been better served to do my due diligence prior to connecting with that first realtor. I mean, you want to look at any reviews that may be out there on this, people that have worked in the past with the realtor. The person has to have the right personality, I think, to work with you. And when you meet somebody, whether or not you hit it off with that person.
Yes.
You want to ask the right questions so that you can assess that individual's knowledge of the marketplace, and you want to make sure that individual has your best interests in mind. So
absolutely,
certainly selecting the right realtor is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a misconception that, do whatever the realtor says, right? But really the realtor's working for you, right? So do your research, right? Have conversations, have dialogue, do some interviews with realtors. Like, hey, what's your portfolio like? What neighborhoods are you selling in? How long have you been in the business? And to Barry's point, the personality, if that's meshing and you feel good about it and you've done your research, start to have those conversations around, hey, what houses are available, right? What open houses are there? So that way they can help you through the process. And, as you're thinking about what home ownership looks like, that realtor is going to be your advisor, essentially, right? And so they're going to help you understand, what to do when you're going through the process of actually selecting a home. So they should be understanding of the neighborhood, the pricing, right? The clientele, right? They should be looking at different comps or different type of comparable sales in that particular neighborhood that you're interested in. And then if they can't find you a home in the area that you're looking for, they have alternatives because of their relationships that they built through previous experience. So they work for you.
Absolutely.
The other
So
thing
they should be responsive as well. I wanted to add that. I mean, if you're reaching out to the realtor and they're not getting back to you and all, that's a red flag.
Oh yeah, that is a big
understand.
red flag.
The other thing is they should be familiar with your profile to the point that they can connect you with the right program. So if you're a veteran, well, now you qualify for a VA loans. If you're looking at FHA, they should be familiar with that program. They should be familiar with down payment assistance and closing cost assistance in the markets in which you're looking for. So ask those questions. Do you know this? I'm a veteran. Do you know that? How comfortable are you with? Because they're going to help you facilitate a transaction that one of the biggest deals, if not the biggest deal in your life.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So we talked about the keys, some of the key steps in the home buying process, but let's talk about what are some of the common pitfalls the first time buyers actually fall into. I think Armand and Barry, you probably are really, really well aware about some of those things that could happen. Share with us some of the pitfalls.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things is underestimating the total cost of home ownership.
Okay.
You know, it's not just the cost to buy the home, but you've got to have money for closing. You got to have money for taxes. You got to have money for insurance. And you, depending on the home that you buy, you have to have money for potential maintenance down the road.
Yes.
And I think this is something that people tend to overlook. You know, I know that I have heard this, and although it's not true, I've heard some suggest you should buy as much home as you can qualify for. Well, that may not be the right move. You don't want to stretch your finances to the point that if something unexpected happens, you're not able to handle it. So again, it goes back to being honest with yourself. But I think underestimating the total cost and overextending yourself is certainly one of the common pitfalls we see with first-time home buyers.
Right. Listening to your friends will get you in some trouble, won't they?
Absolutely. One, I would say absolutely go back to the credit thing, not checking their credit, not knowing their credit rating. Another issue is people being intimidated and not asking questions because they don't want to come across as not being prepared, ready, or ignorant.
Right.
They don't want to humble themselves or allow themselves to be vulnerable to get the information they need. You want to make an informed choice.
Right.
Some people also, what they do is they procrastinate or they're slow. And so they're like, oh, I'll get to it, only to find the perfect house that they can afford. They're there, but they just lost that deal to the family that was there before them because they dragged their feet.
Yes.
Right.
Seen that time and time again. Let's talk about the financing. And again, since we're talking about finding the right fit for a realtor, let's talk about finding the right fit, period. Like the right home, as you just mentioned. So applying for a mortgage, Rulon, what documents or info would a buyer need to just walk into your office to say, I would like this house?
Yeah. To simplify it all, it's the documentation that a lender is looking at when you're going through that process is essentially what your financial situation is based upon the type of work that you have, right? So if you're a W-2 wage earner, right, they want to make sure that they can understand the frequency of which you get paid. So let's say if you get paid biweekly, a lender is going to want to see a few of your pay stubs in order to equate to a full month's of pay. On your pay stubs, you have different criteria on your pay stubs. You're going to have your year-to-date information, how much you've made. Sometimes it has the frequency in which you get paid, your hourly rate or your salary. So that's the first signal for the lender. Okay, this person has consistent income coming in week over week, month over month, year over year, right? So there's no changes there. You're self-employed, that's going to look a little bit different, right? Because you're not getting essentially a pay stub. You may have to actually create a profit and loss. So if you have an accountant that you're working with or you're doing it on your own, profit and loss is essentially a picture of how much your income and your expenses equate to your gross income, right? And so that's the first lens for the lender. It's how much money do you make? The next question is, how much money do you spend, right? So they have to understand your expenses. And a part of that is, right, a part of that is a financial worksheet, right? And so the interesting part about a financial worksheet or actually writing down your expenses is that, it's just human nature to say, I don't want to tell them I spend that much, right? So you might fudge on the numbers a little bit here and there. Well, I'm not really paying on that credit card, or I pay a little bit more here, or my electricity bill is not that high, right? And what happens is once you go through the underwriting process, that underwriter is going to ask more questions around those items you put on that worksheet. And they're going to need clarity on that. And the reason for that is because you've already shared how much money you make. They need to know how much debt or expenses that you have because they need to talk about your debt to income. They need to make sure that with the amount of money you make, you're not spending it all and not having enough to actually pay your mortgage payment, right? Another document they look at is your tax returns. Your tax returns actually verify how much money you made the previous year. So for example, if you're a wage earner and you make X amount of dollars per year, that tax return should reflect something similar.
Right.
Now, what will happen from time to time is if you have another source of income that you didn't validate or verify,
Okay.
the lender will see that in your bank statements and in your tax returns, especially your tax returns, because they'll see another source of income coming in. So let's just say you have a little side job where you're making $2,000 or $3,000 a year. The lender wants to count that and help you with your ability to get more money through financing. So you want to disclose all of that information. Sometimes if you get paid in maybe a unique way, the lender might require a verification of employment. So a letter from your employer, just kind of stating what you do, right? Also, your credit report is another item that they're going to look at as well too, which has your credit score on it, but they're going to really look at your liabilities.
Yeah.
The whole goal from the lender is to understand how much you make, how much you spend, and essentially how much you can afford.
Right. A lot of people are confused about the credit report because you could have a discrepancy, but as long as you can explain it, in most cases, the lenders are like, okay, this make sense. Like a divorce or some period of your time where you may have had like a lapse in income, you were out of work for 3 months. As long as you can explain it, that leads me to my next question, Rulan, that I wanted to ask. So you talked about the 1099 wage earner versus self-employed. Some people have the myth that if you are self-employed that you can't purchase a home or you can't do a large purchase because you can't show the income. Explain what someone would do if they are, let's say, a Lyft driver or a hairdresser or someone that they put the money in their bank regularly, but you won't see a W-2.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't have the resources to, hire an accountant or, the ability to, find unique ways to track your payments, really your bank statements are going to tell the story. Right. And so as you track your deposits, it's probably going to be beneficial to have a separate business bank statement that those transactions are going through. And essentially you can track and create a profit and loss from your deposits, right? So that way the critical issue and the reason, Asia, why that myth is there is because it's hard to validate some of the sources of income when they're coming from different places.
Right.
So one thing about a wage earner is that that there's going to be a payment applied to that bank statement from their employer every 2 weeks or every month.
Right.
And it's like clockwork. So that means less validation from the lender. Now, if you are getting paid $1,000 a month and then the next month you're getting paid $6,000 a month, how does the lender understand the frequency of what you're getting paid? So they want to take quarterly, semi-annually, or annual snapshots of what you make, and they will look at bank statements. They will look at profit and losses that you can create on your own, because a profit and loss is essentially how much money you've accrued in income, how much you have for expenses, and then you just do the math on that. You just subtract that, and that's your net income. So they take that net income and they say, okay, how long is this person making this? So if you are doing Lyft or you're doing some other job where you may not have the frequency in which it makes a bank comfortable just to use one document, you probably have to provide a bit more. The goal is for them to understand, the lender to understand, how much money can you afford? So that way, when you get that mortgage, they know whether you get paid during a high season or a low season, that you're going to pay your mortgage each month. So yes, that is a myth that someone who is self-employed is not able to or going to have an extremely difficult time getting a mortgage. But that is not true. It just takes some diligence, additional support, and also I would say working with a housing counselor. If you're just not sure, right, that housing counselor can walk you through your finances, your budget. They can help you look through your bank statements. One of the biggest, and this is just a side note, one of the biggest documents that causes the most headache for lenders is the last page of a bank statement, right? So if you think about a bank statement, like a physical bank statement, if you're printing it out, there's a page that's the last page that doesn't have any of your financial information on it. It just might have information and privacy clauses from the bank.
Right.
But it's page 505. The bank wants to see page 505, right? So there's something that particular can cause the underwriter to ask more questions because you're not being totally transparent with your financial situation.
Okay.
One thing I would
was
add,
like, what is that page? Okay.
One thing I would add is, as I listen to the responses in the conversation, when you're buying a house,
Mhm.
you have to be organized.
Okay.
You have to organize your documents, make sure you have files, but also if you have to, in the case of an entrepreneur, you have to be organized in knowing where your money's coming from, where it's going, how much you keep, how much you don't.
Right.
The more organized you are, the easier the process can go.
Right.
So you want to start that organization early. You don't want to start it when you're, going to the lender. You got to start it, months in advance, and keeping track of things, and that'll make the approval process a bit easier because you'll have the documentation to prove what your financial situation is all about, and it'll help the bank make the decision whether or not to approve.
I have a question coming in on social media. Is there a list of the items you need somewhere on the website? Anybody?
Well, we do have wellsfargo.com/mortgage education, which is an educational site that we created. Has tons of great information on there, help you get the process started, answer questions around the process of home ownership. I would encourage folks to go visit that site as well too. NFCC has some great stuff on their site as well too, but just in general, try to gather as much information as possible. Everyone's circumstances are going to be a bit different. So you're going to find a uniform document that's going to give you tons of different sources on what information you need to provide. Just do your due diligence, find reputable resources, and that way you can gather up as enough information as possible.
And there are checklists and process maps that you can download from various sources also.
Okay. Is there one on FCC?
That's
NFCC?
correct.
I'll put it there if we don't have it.
There you go. Herman, talk to us a little bit about how someone can choose the right lender or the right financial partner.
Well, one, you want to make sure you can get to them. They're accessible.
Right.
You want to make sure they do business in the area in which you want to borrow. You want to make sure they have that they're responsive. A lot like a realtor. You want to make sure they answer your questions. You want to make sure that they are totally transparent. You want to ask, about fees. You want to ask about what's the process. You want to ask about what do I need to provide you with.
Okay.
And again, even though they're giving you money, they work for you.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that it's a positive relationship, because this is not a one and done. Once they give you the mortgage, guess what? It's like a marriage.
Right.
You want them to be there in good times and in bad. So you want to make sure that you understand them, they understand you, your financial profile. You want to be transparent, and you want them to be transparent.
Absolutely. So, Rulon, what's the real difference between getting pre-qualified and pre-approved? There's a difference.
Yeah, there is. Great question. So I've those two terms, and we're going to do it later. As I mentioned, we're going to do another show in the future around terminology, but I think terminology is so important, right? Pre-qualification is, think about it in the terms of it's what you need to understand what you can actually afford. So, right. So a pre-qualification is essentially having that conversation with your lender.
Right.
And it's a quick overview of your financial situation. So essentially, it allows you to understand what your estimated loan amount could be, right? So let's just say if you're inquiring around a home, but you haven't physically gone to see the home that you're looking for.
Right.
And you just want to know, well, how much can I actually get approved for in a mortgage based upon my financial situation? So it's verbally stated over the phone. You can do it in person. And that lender will say, hey, you can afford $400,000. That doesn't mean you go and try to find a house that's $400,000, but the pre-qualification lets you know what you can potentially be qualified for from your bank, right? And that's powerful for you because it gives you information and it helps you understand where you are financially. The next step is a pre-approval. The pre-approval, it requires a bit more of a deeper conversation with the lender, might require a bit of documentation. But what happens is that lender can give you a pre-approval letter. And that letter can essentially be used when you're having conversations with the seller of said home. And now you have something tangible to say, hey, I've had this conversation with my bank. I'm on the path of securing financing. Here's my letter to validate that my bank is on the path of letting me borrow this money. And now you have more leverage when you have a conversation with the seller of that home that you're looking for, right? So just think about the pre-qualification as empowering yourself,
Right.
and the pre-approval as empowering the transaction.
There it is. Barry, so if someone walked into your office and they had nothing, and they looked on the website and they brought you just their documents, would that be something that you all help with NFCC? Do you actually help with getting a pre-qualification letter, or getting the pre-qualification or getting pre-approved? Is that a process that happens through NFCC?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, whenever someone meets with a housing counselor and they're sitting down, the housing counselor is going to ask them a lot of questions about, their financial situation. They will want to know their income. They will want to know their living expenses. They will want to know what debts they have. And then based on that information, they will be able to tell the borrower, okay, so it looks like you might be able to qualify for X amount. Now, it's going to be up to the bank. You got to go through underwriting and all, but we can help you, I think, have that conversation with the lender before you go to the lender. So in essence, it's very similar to the pre-qualification that Rulon talked about, right. In that, we'll look at income, we'll look at debts, we'll look at living expenses, and we can put that into the calculator and see, okay, you may qualify for this amount. You may be ready then to go to the next step, actually go to the lender and seek a pre-approval. So we can certainly help in that process. And we work hand in hand, with lenders that way. So again, I would highly recommend anyone that wants to be sure that they're ready, start with the housing counseling and the home ownership education.
Yes, and I agree.
I got one thing to add to that.
Please.
A lot of people think I'm going to bypass the housing counselor and go straight to the realtor or straight to the loan officer. And yeah, they can offer insights and whatnot, but that's not their job. Okay. You want to build a team of subject matter experts who specialize in certain things. So let them do their jobs.
Right.
When you have the whole team, if you're playing basketball and you got 4 guards, yeah, you can dribble, but there's nobody rebounding. There's nobody jumping. A whole lot of people trying to shoot. Okay. You want a complete and full team. I know that because I was a center and I got tired of guards shooting the ball for me. So, just want to give you that little tidbit for all the centers and big men.
Okay, there it is. I love that. But Herman, let's talk about this. There are a lot of myths about buying a home. So many misconceptions. I can tell you so many. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about buying a home, especially some of the ones that you've heard? Talk to us.
The ones that I've heard are like buying is always better than renting. Not necessarily.
Okay.
Buying really only makes sense if you plan to stay in a home for several years. Okay. If you have a stable income and you're financially prepared for the responsibilities of ownership. Renting can be smart if you need flexibility, if you're not ready for that upfront cost, if you're not prepared to pay the ongoing maintenance. The beauty of renting is if the toilet bowl is broken, I just call the landlord. If if there's a crack in the ceiling or a hole in the roof, I just call the landlord and keep watching TV as long as the leak's not on my head. Right. So the other one is you got to put down 20%. Oh, no, you don't.
Do not.
20% helps you to avoid PMI, which is private mortgage insurance. But in many cases, there are loan products that are available, and you can put down as little as 3 to 5%.
You can put down zero. I put down nothing.
Even better.
I went through a home buying course, so.
Yep.
Amazing.
Another one, pre-approval means you're guaranteed the mortgage. No, pre-approval does not the final loan approval. A lender can still deny if you go out and buy a big purchase, like, you know what, that big pretty Cadillac or that Mercedes would look real good in that parking, in that garage, and you haven't closed yet. That's a problem.
Okay.
That's right.
So there's some big things. One big one is that homes always appreciate in value. In this country, they typically do. Right. But if something changes in your local market, like they decide they're gonna put a dump 2 blocks away, that's a problem. Yeah. So little things like that. And one thing, you're going to find the perfect home. My wife watches HGTV all the time, and people come up, no, I don't like the color of this counter. Everything else is perfect, but I don't like the color of this counter. Are you kidding me? Right. Are you kidding me?
Right.
So those are just a couple that I have. I'm sure the fellas have got some other ones.
I know. What about you,
yeah.
Barry? Same question.
Yeah, I would say, again, home buying is not for everyone.
Okay.
You've got to understand where you are in life. But there are many advantages to owning a home. But it's not necessarily the right move for everyone in this country to own a home. Aspiring to be a homeowner, I think is a great thing. But, are you willing to do what you need to do in order to purchase that home and maintain that home for, years into the future? And, quite frankly, some people aren't ready to do that. Like Herman, mentioned, if you don't want to have to take care of maintenance issues and that type of thing, then maybe home ownership is not right for you. But, I do believe that home ownership is a solid investment. And for, a good number of people, it is the right decision to make. But, to be honest, it's not right for everyone. So that may be one of the common misconceptions that are out there, that everyone should own a home.
Yeah, true. Rulan, what are some of the benefits of owning versus renting?
Well, when you think about just the benefits of owning a home, the potential for the investment that you've put into that home to be recouped through equity that's put into the home, that's the powerful piece. Now, we'll reference this again, that my partners here, Herman and Barry, everyone does not need to be a homeowner. It's not fit for everyone. But if you're going down that path, understand the situation that you're in, right? Once you get into a home, it's usually going to appreciate, right? Now, let's just say you're in a home and 10 years go by and, you make a little bit more money, household expands a bit. Now you want to get another house. Now, not only do you have the ability to sell said home that acquired and accumulated 10 years of equity, you can keep that as an investment property for another revenue stream in your household, right? So that's a key benefit. It's a wealth builder. Now, let's just say you have the luxury and the ability to pay that loan off. Hopefully you can pay it off in 30 years. Some folks can pay it off a little bit earlier. Now, when you pay that off, and let's just say you retire, you want to start a small business on a lake somewhere, something close to the beach. You have leverage through the equity of that home, right? Let's say you want to put your kids through college. You have a vehicle. Or if you want to leave something to your children in the form of generational wealth, real estate is something that has always been a critical anchor in helping folks progress financially, right? Now, renting has its benefits too, right? To Herman's point, you don't have to worry about an air conditioner going out, right? If you want to get up and leave, your lease is up in 3 months, I'm out of here, right? But when you're owning that home, there's additional responsibilities, but the benefits far outweigh some of the complicated pieces in home ownership. I'll give you a quick story. When I got into my home, the first month of me getting into my home, I had to fix the AC.
Right.
And so I wasn't prepared for this expense. And my first thought was, man, why did I stop renting? I put this down payment down and we moved all the stuff in and the AC goes out and I'm in Orlando, Florida, and it's in July.
Ooh.
So it's hot. And the only thing I could think of was, did I make the right decision? Now, once the AC was fixed, it was the best decision. but you have to dive into your budget. So listen, it's complicated. It is not easy. It is not easy. And one of the reasons why we have this platform, and Asia, once again, thank you for moderating these and You do such a great job of
Thank you.
helping us drive the conversation with all of the energy. But one of the main things is for us to help provide the right type of information. There's a lot of information out there. There could be a lot of misinformation around the process of ownership. We just want to be transparent with the audience and let them know just, hey, the rules of the road, right? What happens when you get in? It's not for everyone, but if it is, this is what will happen. And so there are benefits to owning, but you have to look at yourself and figure out what you want to do financially, where you want to do with your home, and it's the decision you have to make. We just want to give you as many resources, tips, tools, and information as possible.
I know that's right. And let me say this to you. It's like home ownership to me is like being in a good relationship. The good outweighs the bad. I'm just saying.
Right.
Right. That's it.
Right.
That's it.
The good outweighs the bad. Okay, so Barry, let's talk about location, impact, and affordability. Like, what should a buyer kind of weigh the most? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, location is certainly an important aspect of finding a home. I think there's an old adage that says location, 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 meaning that location is very, very important, especially for those homeowners that have children that are in schools. You want to make sure that the home is in an area that has really good quality schools, because education is important, obviously.
Right.
You also want to look at areas where there's lower crime, and you don't want to be a victim of crime. So if you're living in an area that has a higher crime rate, then you're more likely to become a victim of crime, and you want to make sure that you and your family are safe. So that's another aspect of location. Also, and I think Rulon touched on this earlier. You have to consider, where you commute to work. Is it a longer distance, which means you're either going to put a lot of wear and tear on your vehicle, spend more in gas and insurance on an annual basis. That's an additional cost to consider there also. And what are the amenities in the community? Are there community centers, or churches nearby, shopping nearby, parks and recreation? That type of thing I think is important too for those of us that want to live a healthy lifestyle. So all of those things come into play when you're deciding about where to purchase a home. Rulon also touched on the whole aspect of taxes, real estate taxes. Real estate taxes can be more affordable in some communities versus other communities. So it's just a mix of those things, and deciding what's most important for you as an individual. Making a pros and cons list about location to help you decide, okay, this is the ideal location for me, and this is ultimately where I want to live. But understanding too that sometimes more desirable locations, the cost of purchasing a home in those locations may be more expensive than in other locations. And maybe you have to purchase a house that is a bit smaller than maybe what your ideal home is. And, if you're starting out, especially as a first-time home buyer, think about it in terms of, this doesn't have to be my last house. Maybe I care so much about this community, this neighborhood, that I really want to purchase there. I'm willing to, buy a 3-bedroom home instead of a 4-bedroom home, so that I can afford it, knowing that down the road, the home is more likely to appreciate in value. I could potentially sell it and then use the proceeds to maybe buy my ideal home. So all of those things, I think, are great considerations when you're thinking about location.
Absolutely. Herman, what advice would you give someone who's feeling kind of overwhelmed with the buying process?
I would say, take a deep breath.
Okay.
Take a step back.
Okay.
And realize you don't have to go it alone. There's help out there. You can tap into subject matter experts. We've been talking about the benefits of a HUD certified nonprofit credit counselor. They can break it down for you. So you have to, how do you eat a rhinoceros? One bite at a time. So they can dice it up for you nice and add some French fries. So all of a sudden, what was traumatic is now delectable. So they'll break it down for you. They add some special sauce, some ketchup, and you'll be good to go. So take your time, get the right team, quality people, qualify everybody. Make sure you ask your questions. Make sure they'll deal with you professionally. They handle you the way you want to be handled, but let them do what they're called upon, what their subject matter expertise affords them to do, and take advantage of that. The key thing is you don't have to do this alone.
Right. You're not a solo.
Take your time. It's important.
And we touched on this a little earlier. So they need a realtor. I believe we spoke on this. Maybe Rulon mentioned this. We need a realtor, a broker. That's the buyer selling.
Loan officer, broker. Yep.
Yeah. We need a home inspector. Maybe Barry spoke on that, I think. To make
Surveyor.
sure the house, a surveyor, and then a title company, right?
Yep.
That's like your
the
real estate attorney. Okay.
And
so
we're gonna dive into those too in future topics too, because there's a lot of nuance to some of those, where we can dive into a deeper conversation just around the roles that those partners play. And just to Herman's point about building a team, well, we would like to consider the folks on this platform to be your team as well too.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. To share information and to provide you with some sort of guidance, right? Just to get you thinking about the process. And as you continue to enjoy this series, write your notes down. Think about how this resonates with you directly. So that way we can provide deeper insight on the process. We're going to continue to come with deeper topics around homeownership, but it's really beneficial that, you think about some of the things that you're experiencing in your journey of homeownership and leveraging some of the information that we're sharing on the platform.
And spread the word. Share this. This is a resource. Share it with people are in the market or who will be in the market. Let them know. And send us questions so that we can incorporate that in future episodes.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. So listen, we want to just recap once again. We have a whole team that works for you, right? The realtor works for you. The broker works for you. Home inspector works for you. The surveyor works for you. And the title company works for you. And we have the great people at NFCC and at Wells Fargo that are here to help work with you. So if you have any questions, please feel free, as Herman said, to reach out to the National Foundation of Credit Counseling, get your information, or Rulon is also available. I'll go line by line, person by person, and Herman, let them know how they can reach you if they have any additional questions.
Well, you can reach us through the nfcc.org. Okay. Come there and we'll connect you. If you're looking for a counselor, we'll get you connected and we'll start we'll get your spread set before you, and that hippopotamus will be barbecued with the right sauce.
Barbecue hippopotamus. Sounds yummy. And Barry, are you available at the same website?
Yeah, nfcc.org. And I also wanted to mention there are educational resources on the NFCC website around home building. You see the web address that's crawling across the screen for Wells Fargo mortgage education. That's another great resource. Again, housing counseling, I think, is such a good option for borrowers that are looking to purchase a home and want to understand their credit. And another thing about credit I wanted to mention is that you don't have to have a perfect credit score in order to qualify for a mortgage. There are mortgage programs for a variety of different credit types. And so don't feel like your credit has to be absolutely perfect. I mean, certainly, the higher your credit score, the better terms you'll get, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Right. But if you're concerned about your credit, certainly the NFCC can help you to understand your credit and can help you develop an action plan to improve your credit if there's some damage to it.
There you go. It does have to be at least 3 numbers.
Yes. Yes.
Once again, we want everybody to please go to wellsfargo.com/mortgage education and go to nfcc.org. Rulon, how can everybody reach out to you?
Yeah, so Barry's correct. The wellsfargo.com/mortgage education is a great site. I would ask the folks watching, our viewers, to utilize the comment section in the platform to think about topics you want to hear from us, as we are your team to support you with guidance. Continue to share information with us, questions, comments, topics, and we want to try to make sure that we can support all of the knowledge that you want to gain through homeownership.
Absolutely, because we do have another one of these coming up July 10th. We have another
right.
one July 10th at 1 p.m. So if you shoot those questions on over, we'll try to get those addressed at the next session, the next go around. It's always been a pleasure hanging out with you guys. I learn a little bit more every time we talk. And I thank you all so much for what you do, what you have done, what you continue to do. I know there are a lot of people out there that really, really appreciate you. So thank you once again for allowing me to be your host. Once again, my name is Asia Chandler. I'm with Radio 1, Urban 1. You can follow me at Always Ask Asia on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Again, that's Always Ask Asia. Please make sure that you go to wellsfargo.com/mortgage education and nfcc.org for more information. We will talk to you again next time, again, July 10th at 1 p.m. Until we meet again, stay blessed and keep paving the way forward.